Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. It's been a while since we've done one of these, and understandably so. I haven't really been too enamored by any of the card designs in a while, but I'm fairly interested in most of the cards that are released here, so I felt it was time to bust out the PowerPoint once again. We've got 4 cards we're talking about. We have the new Twilight cards for Meguru and Natsuha, we have the permanent SSR for Kiriko, and the Grade Fest support for Amana. Twilight's collection is technically limited, but comes back around whenever a new Twilight's collection banner is released, and Kiriko will be added to the permanent pool once her banner is over at the end of the month. As for Amana, make sure that her card is technically really limited, so farm up as many Grade Fest coins as you can in order to get copies of this card. I do recommend that. Without any further ado, let's get started. This time around, our Twilight card is Meguru, a vocal spin on the very first Twilight card, Mono. Designed as the evolution point of modern Illumine, Meguru attacks primarily with her vocal stat, supplements it with her dance and visual, then follows up with a boost for passive activation rates for several turns. Her final appeal is a vocal AoE that can plus appeal in a fairly unique way, granting a huge bonus to rainbow builds for a long time. She's certainly very unique in that regard. Illumine are no strangers to rainbow builds, but this is the first card that really makes it feel like they want to lean into rainbow specifically. As always, remember that Twilight not having access to Hazuki means that you may be stuck at a relatively low power Meguru without serious luck or serious jewel investment. This isn't entirely true technically, because now they're going to be doing something it seems every anniversary or half anniversary, where they're now going to be selling Hazuki packs for Twilight specifically. I don't think it is necessarily worth it unless you're willing to drop down a decent chunk of money, but it is something to consider at the very least. Just don't expect to be maxing out a card anytime soon if that's your only means of doing it. Meguru's memory appeal is interesting, being mostly a rainbow appeal on Link, while primarily being a vocal appeal at the forefront. While this hasn't always translated to high damage in the past, this card is lining up to cause a huge shift in the dynamics for Illumine builds. The ratios on her memory appeal are actually not too bad, all things considered, and can hit really hard. We'll get into that in a moment. Her roles are center, maybe. I think there's very high potential for it. She is a buffer, she attacks all, and she technically improves upon the chance of you getting buffs. I didn't know how exactly to word that, so we'll just go with the buff up. And I highly recommend pulling for this Meguru, especially if you are trying to build Illumine or Vocal Illumine. Meguru's initial skill is a Vocal 3.0 that follows up with a Dance Visual 1.0. It increases your passive skill activation chance by 10% for 2 turns. This links into a Vocal Dance Visual 100% buff for 5 turns. Her 1-star appeal is a Vocal 5.0 that follows up with a Dance Visual 1.0, increases your passive skill activation chance by 15% for 3 turns, and follows up with the same Link appeal, a Vocal Dance Visual 100% buff for 5 turns. Her 4-star appeal is a Vocal 4.5 that hits all judges, followed by a single target Dance and Visual 1.0 appeal that increases your passive skill activation rate by 20% for 3 turns. And finally, the plus appeal on this requires you to be the full Illumine lineup, and the number of current passives you have to be 6 or more. Technically, you could only cap out at 6, so I don't know if this is implying that we're going to be able to have more than 6 passives a turn soon, but just understand that you need a full tray of passives and all of Illumine on your team to activate this plus appeal, which grants you a Vocal Dance Visual 100% buff for 5 turns. Now for her passives. Meguru's 1-star passive is a Vocal 60% up and Dance Visual 30% up if it's turn 2 or earlier. This has a 30% chance to activate once, and this unlocks a Vocal plus 150 uncap. Her 2-star passive, a Vocal Dance Visual 100% up that requires the full Illumination Stars lineup. This has a 10% chance to activate twice. This also has a Vocal Dance Visual plus 100 uncap. Her 3-star passive is a Vocal 140% up and Dance Visual 80% up that requires Meguru to be in your skill history. This has a 20% chance to activate twice, and this grants a Mental plus 200 uncap. Lastly, her 4-star Rainbow passive we'll talk about in a moment, but this grants us a Vocal Dance Visual 100 uncap, and her memory appeal when maxed out is a Vocal 2.5 appeal that follows up with a Vocal Dance Visual 2.5 appeal. Said Rainbow passive is a vocal 200% up and dance visual 100% up that requires Meguru in your skill history or the turn count to be 5 or later. This has a 30% chance to activate twice and is limited to once per turn. Her Twilight passive is the same as some of the previous cards, a memory gauge gain plus 5% and appeal strength plus 3%. Continuing the trend of this set of Twilight cards, Meguru possesses the same Twilight passive that Chiyuki and Rinzai had prior. This effect has proven itself to be pretty strong, so it's a worthwhile passive to inherit onto books by having Meguru be the final piece to your know-how merging. Just remember that you can't produce Meguru using her own book. Her Rainbow passive is immensely powerful, as it allows her to lead off with any of her appeals, ideally her 4-star, to immediately put the skill online for the next 4 turns at least. It makes her both an ideal opener and ender to your Illumine turn orders. Now, Twilight's collection has not gotten any less expensive necessarily, so it's fair to consider that many may only have this Meguru at 0 or 1 star. Meguru, like the others, really works out well at 2 stars. You have access to a very easy-to-use passive, and both of your appeals to get the ball rolling. While naturally her ceiling is insanely high once you factor in the 4-star passive and appeal, she can still do plenty without them. Vocal Illumine by itself is still missing some key pieces to feel like a truly cohesive team, but players are also finding ways to make Rainbow Illumine work with both this Meguru and Twilight mono. It's a pretty neat time to be playing Illumination Stars, I think. For the support recommendations, the obvious MVP here for a vocal build is Twilight Kogane, but paired up with specifically the vocal Mamimi, or Murmurmaid, and Kawaihito Sakuya. Other cards can include Twilight Hinata, Twilight Nichika, and some perm options may include cards like the Fuyuko or Asahi. It's been a while, so allow me to reintroduce you to Vocal Good Stuff. The core trio of Kogane, Mamimi, and Sakuya carry every vocal team on their backs currently. Nichika and Hinata are bonuses depending on how hard you invest into Twilight banners, and non-limited options can include cards like Fuyuko or Asahi for their natural synergy with each other. The Antika Shell does so much between passive and appeal synergy that it's hard to not include them on every possible vocal build. So adjust for what you can accordingly. For the grades, Meguru as a center gets a very easy double S. At first glance, a rainbow memory appeal doesn't seem too strong, but after a few moments, recognizing this as a vocal 5.0 appeal that tacks on an extra 2.5 dance and visual makes this a lot more potent in this day and age. Usually the biggest thing holding these back have been the multipliers, and this Meguru certainly has the space to make this pretty strong. And even ignoring the rainbow aspect of it, a 5.0 vocal on Illumine is not really half bad to be building into either, if you choose to just focus only on vocal. As a unit, B+ to SS-. Meguru doesn't quite have the firepower at lesser copies, which is standard fare for Twilight. When maxed out, Meguru becomes this really fascinating piece for Illumine that opens up the possibility of vocal Illumine being relevant, once they get a support or two, and her alongside Mono make Rainbow Illumine much more possible than ever before. It's one of these cards where you can definitely tell they're holding back slightly, because there are some other aspects I do appreciate about this card. Most of her passives have good activation rates outside of her 2-star passive, which means that her buffing her passive strength is actually a fairly reasonable benefit. Now you're getting things that feel pretty much in line with some of the better passives in the game, so what you're losing out on is not much, especially when you consider her 4-star appeal giving you a 20% bonus, which means that many of your passives are now sitting anywhere from 30 to 40% activation, which is higher than average. This is definitely a really cool card to experiment with if you are able to. Next up, we then have Natsuha. The newest Twilight support is Natsuha, and as a Hokuda producer myself, I'm fairly mixed on this card. On one hand, her masteries combined with passives makes her a potent threat on Dance Hokuda, a team that historically ran off the pure firepower of Natsuha 7 and nearly nothing else. Dance Hokuda as a team has not gotten a ton of specific support outside of produced cards, so their support lineup has been relatively lackluster for a good while. Her 4-star passive does resolve this for all intents and purposes. The issue that comes up is that Hokuda, who is still fairly attention dependent, has no attention on this card at all. Also notably, this card doesn't have Duet either, which is a big thing that has played into Hokuda and honestly plays into this card technically, yet has no access to it. It's a very strong card for Hokuda, it's just a little odd. It tries to synergize with the team, but it also conflicts in that same way. Before we get to that, though, her masteries. First, she has Idol's Bond, which is the usual Twicolate affair, reaching plus 15 at level 80. She has 5 unique support skills. Unit Mastery SP reaching plus 10 at level 65, Dance Mastery SP reaching plus 12 at level 70, Dance Mastery Dance Limit Up reaching plus 8 at level 80, Unit Mastery Stamina reaching plus 3 at level 75, and Dance Stay Mastery reaching plus 5 at level 80. Her support appeal does scale, starting out at a Dance 3.0, becoming a 3.1 that buffs your Dance by 5% for 3 turns at level 60, and gradually upgrading to a Dance 3.5 that raises your Dance by 25% for 3 turns by level 80. Her TFD idea is Dance, her Insight token for Grad is Mental, and her proficiency and landing point is in SP. Natsuha's initial passive is a Dance 60% up that requires it to be turn 3 or earlier, has a 20% chance to activate twice, and comes with a Dance plus 50 uncap. Her 1-star appeal is a Dance 1.5 that follows up with a Dance 0.4 to 2.0 appeal to all judges that scales based on how many cards you have in your skill history. This also grants a Dance 20% buff for 3 turns, and has another Dance plus 50 uncap. Her 2-star passive is a Dance 110% up if it's turn 3 or later, has a 20% chance to activate twice, and has a Dance plus 50 uncap. Her 3-star appeal is a Dance 2.0 that follows up with a Dance 0.6 to 3.0 to all judges, that scales based on how many cards are in your skill history, and grants a Dance 50% buff for 3 turns, and comes with a Dance Mental plus 75 uncap. Her Rainbow passive is a Dance 200% up that requires the full Hokago lineup and the turn count to be 4 or later. It has a 20% chance to activate once, and this comes with a Dance Mental plus 75 uncap. Natsuha gets anywhere from an A to a SS. Again, the usual Twilight's Collection issue. 2 stars, the general sweet spot of masteries and passives, but Hokuto really can't afford to not have this card be maxed out to make the full use of her 200% passive. Her appeals are cute, makes all of your members mini AoE units, but it'll be harder to stack up your duets because of it. It's another aspect of Hokuto that feels missing from this card, as I mentioned earlier. In a properly built Dance Hokuto team, this card will reign pretty hard. Just don't be surprised if things feel off without immediate access to attention or duet without the proper cards to back it up. You will have to supplement this card, which is why it feels weird for it to be a Twicolate card that feels so dependent on other aspects, especially when many of the things it wants to do are in its kit technically, just not in a way that feels conducive to functioning on its own. It doesn't feel very independent, if that's the best way to put it. But I still think this card is a must pick up for Dance Hokuto teams specifically. If you're playing just a general Dance pile of cards, this probably isn't the best card for you, unless you really do want to play around with future Dance Hokuto supports when they decide to show up. Next up, we have our permanent SSR, Kiriko. In an interesting twist, Shiny has released a new permanent support in regards to the vote, rather than locking this card away to the limited dimension. Kiriko is a rainbow support, having access to the main room masteries for vocal, dance, and visual, while also providing stay masteries for each, making her a true all-rounder. Her passives play into the gimmick of running any of the 3 finalists of this particular phase of voting, and makes her a relatively competent card for modes like Wing to breeze through. Her support skills include Vocal Mastery Vocal, Dance Mastery Dance, and Visual Mastery Visual, all reaching plus 10 at level 70. She has access to Vocal, Dance, and Visual Stay Masteries, which all reach plus 5 at level 80. Her support appeal is an excellent 2.5 out of the box that gradually becomes an excellent 3.0 by level 80. Her TFD idea is Visual, her Insight token for Grad is Vocal, and her proficiency and landing point is in Visual. Kiriko's 0-star appeals are in Vocal 2.5, a Dance 2.5, and a Visual 2.5. Her 1-star passive is a Vocal Dance Visual 20% up that requires Kiriko, or Fuyiko, or Luca on your team, and it has a 20% chance to activate 3 times. This comes with a Vocal Dance Visual plus 50 uncap. Her 2-star passive is a Vocal Dance Visual 68% up that again requires either Kiriko, Fuyiko, or Luca on your team. You can choose to have one or all of them. It does not matter as long as it's any one of those 3 being on your team. This has a 44% chance to activate once. Her 3-star uncap is a Vocal Dance Visual plus 50, and her 4-star appeal is an excellent 3.5 that raises the judge's interest by 20% for 3 turns. Kiriko gets a B. Maybe a little higher depending on what you're trying to use her for. I think this card's very good for Wing, so I would maybe say if you're specifically trying to true end a lot, or you want a card that is only for Wing, this card's like an A. Kiriko doesn't have quite the firepower to make her a strong support in Fest building, but she's very acceptable for mowing your way through produce modes. Having an excellent appeal on a support makes dealing with judges much easier, because it means that she will always be able to deal the same amount of damage to any judge regardless. Her passives are also very convenient for this too, because running any of the three is not really all that difficult. She's a permanent SSR, so ideally you'll find her soon enough. I still would say this is a low to moderate recommendation. If you are really hurting for a wing support, you can consider it, but we're also in the middle of a Twilight banner, so for the time being, this is definitely not the priority banner to be focusing on if you need to spend your jewels anywhere. Unless you just really like Kiriko, or Luca, or Fuyuko. Finally, we have our Grade Fest support, Amana. After a reasonable while, we have our next Grade Fest support, which is the start of seemingly a new set of Magical Girl cards for everyone. Amana is a pure dance support with a fairly generic set of passives, a strong but very impractical 4-star passive, and the always appreciated Know-How Discovery Mastery, which is great for people that are trying to farm up abilities in order to make some strong books in Step, especially after the weird apology of boosting Know-How Inheritance in Step until near the end of the month. So, this is a pretty prime time to be farming. For that reason alone, she's a good recommendation, just not really for actual team building. We'll get into why in a moment. Her support skills include Dance Mastery Mental reaching plus 14 at level 75, Room Mastery reaching plus 3 at level 60, Dance Mastery Dance Limit Up reaching plus 3 at level 70, and Know-How Discovery Mastery reaching plus 3 at level 80. Her support appeal does scale, starting at a Dance 3.0, working its way up to a Dance 3.5 by level 80. Her TFD idea is Dance, her Insight token for Grad is Visual, and her proficiencies in Landing Point are in Dance and Mental. Amana's 1-star passive is a Dance 20% up that requires you to be in the dance position, and has a 30% chance to activate once. This grants a Dance plus 30 uncap. Her 2-star passive is a Dance 45% up that requires it to be turned 2 or earlier, and has a 20% chance to activate once. Her 3-star appeal is a Dance 2.8 that applies a mental 1% regen for 3 turns and grants a Dance plus 50 uncap. And her 4-star passive is a Dance 150% up if it's turn 7 or later. This has a 30% chance to activate once. Amana gets a C for basically everything, and is an S for grinding on abilities. So as you figured, this card is not very good for making a good produce card. The intention is to bring this support along to any produce mode that isn't Step in order to up the odds of you getting abilities that you'll eventually pass on through Step. Her final passive feels aggressively tacked on and feels very tone deaf after introducing Master's Fest, which ends on turn 6. So now this free card doesn't even have a passive that's worth using despite its numbers in this new coveted game mode for Grade 6 and Grade 7. Let's just keep an eye out for future Grade Fest cards as we go. I imagine we'll be seeing a vocal and visual version of this card not too long from now. So, that will do it for the video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. I was really surprised to have to get through all these cards, and to be honest, there's some things that have held me back from being able to do this video for a couple days now, so I'm glad I was able to get it done with at this time of day, at the very least. Next time we'll be talking about whatever banner comes next. I also thought about talking about the strange maintenance and events that transpired after the Meguru update a couple days ago. If you're interested in that, let me know, and I may just consider making a quick video on that. Otherwise, till the next video, I've been Sho, thanks for watching, have a wonderful rest of your day.